Hey, WRC fam. Are you a school counselor looking for support and mentorship? I've launched the Well-Rounded Counselor Facebook group. There, you'll find lots of encouragement and community from counselors all over the world. You can join the live trainings where you can connect and learn from myself and others. It's a safe and private group, and only you have to answer a few questions to join. I'll leave the link down in the show notes. But what are you waiting for? Join today, and I'll see you in the group. Welcome to the WRC podcast. I'm your host, Katrina Marie, and you're in the right place. Here at the Well-Rounded Counselor podcast, what you can expect is to learn, shift your thinking, and gain personal and professional growth. And if you have not yet done so, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another podcast episode. The conversation starts now. Welcome back to the WRC podcast. I am so thrilled to bring you a very special guest today. I am bubbling with excitement and have been looking forward to this episode since this person graciously agreed to be on my podcast. So I would love to welcome my dear friend and former colleague, Stephen Johanson. Stephen Johanson currently serves as the university counselor at United World College in Costa Rica, working with the international boarding students during their journey through the IB diploma. Prior to UWC, Stephen worked for Dubai American Academy and Memphis University School in counseling roles and at Ohio Wesleyan University in admissions. In his nonlinear educational journey, Stevens earned a bachelor's from Rhodes College in political science and a master's from Vanderbilt University in education, and is currently working on his international school counseling certificate through the University of San Diego. Having served on various committees and volunteered for SACAC, NACAC, ACCIS, and IACAC, Stephen strives to stay in touch with what's happening beyond the walls of his school. In his free time, he often hikes, plays ultimate frisbee, basketball, or some other organized game, and he travels a lot with his wife. He enjoys jumping out of airplanes and reads fantasy or science fiction novels. Some of my personal most favorite memories of Stephen have been his gifted singing and acting skills. Another being named the 2021 recipient of the unofficial but official Rick Clark Award, and he's also known as our tech tip guru of the counseling office. But most important is his infectious positive spirit and desire to serve students. Anyone who gets to know Stephen and spend time with him is a better person. And I'm so proud to call you my colleague and friend. So everybody, please, please, please welcome Stephen Johanson to the WRC podcast.
Wow, KK, that is quite the introduction. I didn't realize the sweet memories were going to be in there, and now I'm going to start the podcast with tears in my eyes. So that's great. What fun. So happy to be here and excited that you wanted to have me on.
I'm so grateful you decided to agree. And Stephen, can you just tell us a little bit about your journey, how you became a counselor, and what you're currently up to?
Sure. It was always my dream to become a college counselor, as every little boy dreams of. What do you want to be when you grow up? A college counselor? No, of course not. I wanted to be a vet for the longest time. I worked at a vet clinic in high school and went into college pre-vet. And I actually, one of the reasons I had chosen Rhodes is they had a really high acceptance rate to vet school. But of course that didn't happen because aside from my own dog, I don't do any work with dogs. And it's really cool. I think that's one of the neat things about the U.S. education system is the flexibility to move around and try different things. And so it was really a cool thing when I discovered political science, and I found myself really passionate about those kinds of questions that we were wrestling with in classes. But alongside that, I think, the real thing that drove me to college counseling was the farm system. I was a tour guide and an overnight host, and then I was an intern one summer, and just so on and so forth. And eventually I was getting ready to graduate, and I was looking at master's degrees in higher education. And one of my mentors said to me, he said, "Stephen, why in the world are you going to get a master's degree?" And I was like, "Well, I don't have any other skills." And he's like, "You mean like the skill sets that you've been honing for 4 years of presenting and working with students and families and so on and so forth?" And he really pushed me towards the admissions counseling world. And Bud, Richie, if you ever are listening to this, know that you had a profound impact on the trajectory of my life. But so that's what got me into the counseling world and into admissions. And so working for Ohio Wesleyan was pretty easy. It's another college that changes lives, and it's a small liberal arts school located just outside of a major city. And so there were a lot of similarities. It was pretty easy for me to be able to sell the school because I felt like I was selling a very similar experience to my own. But, I think aside from winter, which certainly drove me away from Ohio, it was the big thing for me was looking at my colleagues on the counseling side and feeling like they had the opportunity to be on the students' team a little bit more than I did. I was on the university's team. And like at times those two things ran parallel to each other. But, I always felt when I came to yield season that, I'm convincing the student that I've known for 9 months through like 4 phone calls, that they need to come to my place, and this is where they need to spend their money, and this is where they're going to achieve their dreams. And while much of that could have been true, I also believe that students have so many right places, where, whether or not they're successful largely hinges on, a base level of support system, and then it's students accessing that. So that's what led me to this side of the desk, and I've really enjoyed it. Thankfully, Brian K. Took pity on me and brought me back down to the South and gave me a college counseling job. And one more shout out about somebody who has changed the trajectory of life, Emily Tollison, who is at the American School of Doha, used to work in Memphis, and she was the reason that we ever started looking abroad. And so cool for Meredith and I to have that experience in Dubai and now in Costa Rica. And just for the sake of, I'm going to mention her name so many more times. Meredith is a middle school math teacher who, for the first time in our relationship, works at a different school than me here in Costa Rica. But that's kind of how we got here along our path and our trajectory.
Amazing. And so tell us a little bit about maybe some additional roles and responsibilities you may have taken up, and how did you balance that with all the amazing positions and posts that you've had, whether it was in the States or abroad?
Yeah, I really love the movie Robots. I haven't seen it in a long time, but Robin Williams voices one of the main characters, and his tagline in it is "See a need, fill a need." And I think that for any like budding college counselors or people who are looking to move into the college counseling realm, like that's honestly, it probably works in any profession, because the idea is, I have interest in education broadly, right? And potentially moving into administration at some point and all of those kinds of things. And so, I found that what I've really done over the course of time was saw something that needed to happen and just kind of done it. One of my first pieces of involvement that I was like most excited about was being a club sponsor for Tearing Down the Walls, which is a club promoting conversations around race and equity in the South. And sponsoring that club, I was like, oh my God, I get to see a different side of my students. I get to be involved in something that I am passionate about, right? And so I found that type of thing gives me a lot of fuel. And honestly, the reason I did it was because these students needed somebody to help them, right? Needed somebody to travel with them, needed someone to help them organize the club and those kinds of things. It was just so cool. And so I found that both in like club realm, right? I coached Ultimate Frisbee and sponsored Model UN, but also in the professional realm, the same thing applies, right? When we were at DAA, DAA was looking to expand its pathways, and I happened to be one of the staff members with the most knowledge of the AP program. And so it was just a really natural fit when I applied for that position because, I had a lot of prerequisite knowledge having come from 5 years at an AP school. And so, that would be my biggest recommendation is, see a need, fill in, where in admissions, I took on overnight hosts and tour guides because the person who was in charge of that moved to advancement. And that was really neat. I got to see things differently from a student perspective because I think for me, that's been one of the biggest benefits of taking on extra stuff. And seeing like how other people are operating in their own world, both students, teachers, admin, and I think it helps inform the conversations that we have in counseling as well. I will say, KK, I'm a little bit jealous. I think I would be better at some of these things if I had a little bit more of your detail-oriented and organized nature within me. Because one of those things, like every staff meeting that we had at DAA, you're like, yes, of course I've accomplished the tasks we talked about last week, because those are the tasks we talked about accomplishing. And I think in terms of balancing, the role of college counselor with these auxiliary things, I think one of the things that I wish I did a little bit better, and continue to try and work on in your image, is making sure I'm taking care of home base first. Because other people can help with other roles and those kinds of things, but your own role is harder to execute using someone else, right? So you have to be the one who takes care of that. And so I think in terms of balance, that's one of the most important things, making sure I can do college counseling first and then do these other things. Because otherwise, the people who suffer potentially are students, which are the last people we want to suffer. And the last thing I would add to that is, if you're going to make those decisions, make them with your team. I think I felt so much support from the team at DAA when I took on the AP coordinator role, right? Each of you in your own ways stepped up and said, hey, Stephen, let me take this off your plate, or let me help you knock this out, and that really made me able to take on the AP coordinator role. The same was true in Memphis. I had a boss / partner, Zach Hansen, who just really supported me in doing things and doing the clubs and being a part of mentorship at SACAC. And he recognized that I wanted to grow and develop in those ways, but that also meant that he helped me stay on track, and reminded me of the things I needed to do in the office and helped me take care of those when needed. And, I'm just so thankful to those support systems, because they're so vital in order for anyone to do those auxiliary things. And so I would say find your team, make sure you're taking care of home base, and channel KK's organization and detail-oriented nature, and you'll be all right taking on those things.
One of the things I remember most about you, Stephen, is the ongoing joke of where's Stephen, kind of like AKA where's Waldo, because you were never in your office. And I don't know if that was a good or a bad thing, but I think it was a good thing, because you were always doing something focused on students. You always had students' best interest in mind. So whether you were in your office, you had students there, or whether you were out of your office and we couldn't find you, you were probably at some meeting with kids, helping them in some way, or at some club meeting, or you were just so heavily involved in the short time that we did work together. I don't want to say short time, it was 2 years, but during that time, you went head first. You didn't waste any time getting involved in the community. And how do you if you were giving somebody who's going abroad for the first time, would you recommend doing that? Getting just involved as much as you can, as well as maintaining the responsibilities of your current role?
I think that my first year, it was a bit tougher. Because for me, the learning curve of international education was big. I get schools, right? Once you've worked in a school, you get the essence of schools, right? But going from almost all of my students applying to one country, and even most of them applying in one region in the United States, to having students apply to 19 different countries, right? That's wow, the learning curve was huge. And so yes and no, I guess, would be my answer. I would say depends on a person's comfort level with the role. I felt really comfortable within the college counseling role. And since so many DAA students do apply to the US, I felt like there was room for me to branch out. So in that first year, I took on MUN, which was awesome. And working with Kelly was great. And let's be real, the MUN kids, they're just the best. They're just the best. So that was a really exciting thing. But I do think that sometimes you can take on too much. And I tried to do that in my first role in college counseling. And I'm so thankful for my boss. Like, I went to our activities director like week 1, and I'm like, let's do things. And I came back to my boss, and he's like, Stephen, you've never been a college counselor before. Do you know what this entails? And I was like, no, I'm 23 and know very little. And so, I think it's cool to take on. And I will say, club sponsorship can be a very easy way to get involved and to get a little plugged in. And I do think that it has benefited my counseling practice because it does put you out there visible to students in a way that is really sweet. And I found the same, if you go to events, right, even outside of working hours, if you go to the basketball games, football games, or you go to the theater shows or whatever, like, that means a lot to students. And I think when we talk about relationship building, helping us write letters of rec, helping us advise students better, I do think that there's a lot of value in getting involved. But coming back to that idea of taking care of home base, like, it depends on your comfort level. Like, are you confident that you can do your job and do these other things? Because you were hired for your job, and students need you to do your job.
Absolutely. That is why you get hired for the role in the first place. So you mentioned
right.
that when you went abroad, you had some steep learning curves. What were some things that you thought you knew going into it, but you really didn't know going into it?
Yeah, one of those things that when I transitioned from university to college counseling, was working with families a lot more. Because in the admissions role, you do interact with families, but you mostly, I think, interact with families in springtime, like when the financial clause comes out and like everybody is interested in, how can I afford education? And, families tend to know a little bit more than their students about finances. And so, that's where the vast majority of your parent communication comes from. And in the fall, when you're out there recruiting, you're used to interacting with mostly students. Of course, parents are there, and you always have the odd parent who sends you an email every week. But there is a difference when you are on the team of the family. You interact with those families a lot more. And so, I think one of my first learning curves when moving from admissions to college counseling was about working with families, communicating with parents effectively, making sure that I was helping them set their own boundaries, both with me and with their students. And that can be a challenge, especially because college counseling is scary for a lot of families. They're like, oh my God, what's my student going to do? How are they ever going to survive? Right? There's 28,000 schools. How do we decide? And so that was a big learning curve for me is, how to, entertain parents enough in the sense that you make them feel comfortable, but also push them to let their students be at the forefront of the process. And I would say that work is continually ongoing. And I'm always trying to hone those skills because it can be a challenge to figure out where the best way to help parents and families set boundaries is. So that was a really big learning curve for me. In terms of international ed, one of those funny learning curves is like in the US, we speak in idioms all the time, right? And some of those idioms make no sense to an international community, right? Hit it out of the park. Yeah. Nope, baseball's an American thing largely, right? And if they're not happen to be connected to baseball, that phrase means nothing. Get it straight from the horse's mouth. Like, come on, why are we talking to horses, right? So that was another one of those more culturally learning curves, is having to understand, like, I needed to change the way I was phrasing things to ensure that families, students understood what I was trying to communicate. And so that's been a really neat thing. I think that there's also some other more natural ones about, recognizing that when you work with different cultures, like they're going to interact with you differently, right? In some cultures, it is inappropriate for a man and another person's wife to shake hands, right? Or to touch or anything along those lines. In the South, in the United States, we just like hug everybody, right? And so like that was a different thing. And so, I think there's some really cool cross-cultural things that I had to learn, and that I think have made me a more conscientious individual. And so that's really neat. But I would say those are some of the big learning curves that I've had over the course of time.
Amazing. Yeah, I would agree with you. I didn't know what I didn't know, especially when I went abroad. You only come in with your lens of knowing the U.S. and maybe just an area of the U.S. and you come from that context, and you get thrown into a school with over 100 nationalities. It just becomes like a steep learning curve for anybody. Even me in the role 10 years later, being here in the UAE, I still am constantly learning because I'm evolving, right? And that's kind of the fun part about our job. No matter where we go, even if we stay in one place or we move on, we still have to evolve. So absolutely. And so like, how do you find your like work-life balance? Because you do all these things, you're a counselor, you're heavily involved in the school community. Like, how do you find balance? And what kind of things do you do? I know I mentioned it when I introduced you, but how do you find balance outside of all of that?
That's a great question. I think balance can be hard, and especially I think can be really school dependent on how easy that balance is to find. At MUS we had 3 counselors per 100 students, but the expectations of how we interacted with each of those students, were really, really high. And how many meetings we were having with them and with their families, and all these really intricate things. And DAA similarly, different kind of challenges, right? We had more students, and so having 70 students in a caseload is a lot. To try and meet with them and do all of the things, especially at DAA, us being comprehensive counselors. I think one of the skill sets that's really important is prioritization. What needs to get done now? Prioritization is just so key. Because some of the things in our world are a little bit delayed, right? Like you can start writing letters of recommendation the first time you meet a student, right? But they're all going to be due at the same time. And so how are you going to spread that out? Because if you wait until October 31st and you're trying to write 30 letters in a day, well, first off, that's not going to happen. And second off, you're going to drive yourself insane and have a terrible Halloween. I think prioritization is really key. Right? What of that MUN stuff needs to get done today? What of that AP coordinator stuff needs to get done today? And how do I need to be preparing myself in the college counseling world to make sure that I'm going to meet all of the deadlines that I need to meet for my students? Mm-hmm. Not to mention on top of that, of course, all of the other meetings that you're in just naturally as a college counselor, SIT team meetings, parent meetings, student meetings, DNF list meetings, and all of these kinds of things that you have to take on as a counselor as well. I do think that there is some element of sacrifice of personal time. If you're going to take on additional roles, that's going to mean sometimes you're doing things like rec letter writing outside of work, because it's hard to meet the needs of all of the students. And like in my role as AP coordinator, like I needed to meet with my students, AP students, potentially AP teachers, my students' teachers, like the admin meetings, like all of these other kinds of things during the day. And so that meant like there just wasn't time for me to write rec letters. Mm-hmm. Right? So that was going to be my Saturdays. And so I think that there's that prioritization aspect, and also recognizing that like there's only 24 hours in a day. There's only in theory 8 hours a day that you're at the school. And so if you want to take on some of these things, take on things that you care about, because it makes it easier when it comes to sacrificing your personal time. When you have that MUN on the weekends, when you're going to workshops for AP coordinator because you need to know more, right? Like that feels better if you care about it. Mm. And there'll be some things that you just have to do, right? Whether you like them or not. But if you've prioritized it, if you've chosen those activities and the ways you're getting involved well, I think you can find that balance more so. And the beauty, one last thing I would say is work on where you're setting your boundaries and clearly communicating those with your team, clearly communicating those with your students and with your parents, right? I'm not going to be available after this time, but I'm always available in this time. That lets them know what you need from them in terms of when you want communication and those kinds of things. and like helps in your outside relationships as well, like with your partner, with your spouse, like them knowing when you're going to be available for them as well, right? To meet your more personal side of needs and those kinds of things. So I think those things help with the work-life balance.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And so I'm so grateful that you shared like your journey. What advice would you give someone who is thinking about changing sides of the desk? If they're coming from maybe the admission side, or maybe they're coming from a nonprofit, or maybe they're coming from a totally different, I guess, career, and they want to become a school counselor, what advice would you give someone?
My first piece of advice is do it. I often tell friends, colleagues on the other side of the desk that this is a really sweet side to be on. Like, admissions counseling has a lot of really neat things attached to it, right? I love traveling. I love being able to talk to a lot of different students about their dreams, right? And getting to really know a university, right? And being able to talk to any student and say, like, oh, you're interested in Greek philosophy? Let me tell you about Professor Jansen and all of the cool things he's doing in his classes, right? And that you can be doing here. And that's really neat, because I, in this role, don't have as much specific knowledge of every university. And so, I might be able to tell them cool things that they can do with these universities, but so much relies on the admissions counselor and the website and the research of the student to learn those more specific ways they can achieve their dreams. So I get the draw, I do, to admissions. On the flip side, here you're with them start to finish. You get to see them grow over the course of high school. You get to see what they're involved in and the ways in which they're making an impact on your campus. And you're getting to help them articulate that for themselves and articulate it in your letter in a way that, like, you can help them think about their dreams at, for most of my schools, we max out in applications at 10. And so you can help them think about, like, okay, are these 10 schools places where you can go and be really excited about achieving your dreams and those kinds of things, right? So I do think that there's just so much neatness to being on the college counseling side and feeling very deeply connected to students along their paths. And as they grow and develop, keeping in touch with them to see, like, holy cow, like that small child that walked in as a freshman with barely any meat on their bones is now like a fully developed human, like with doing things in the world. And that's really neat. I will say one of those skill sets that, I've seen in you, Katrina, and I think is so neat and important on the college counseling side, but also, like, is a huge pro. Like, you grow a lot in this role. Every student that impacts you, you grow with them, mm-hmm. right? And in your case, Katrina, you had to adapt to going from a purely college counseling model at the same school to all of a sudden our office was a comprehensive socio-emotional, academic, and college counseling room. And I got to see you adapt to that so well. And I think it's really neat to watch your colleagues grow and to get to grow together with them in some really sweet and powerful ways that only serve to benefit students in the long run. So I think if you're looking to get involved with it, it's really easy to find ways into that. I would encourage you to think about, the ways in which you've already worked with students and parents. Think about the presentations that you're already used to doing to try and engage them, because all of those skill sets translate directly, right? Knowing about universities, knowing what the application process, knowing how readers are going to view them. And we present all the time to families, like how to write a college essay, how to search for schools in Europe, like so on and so forth. So all of those skills translate directly. So it's a really easy transition, I think, if you're looking to get involved. And, you can start domestically if you want in whatever country you're currently in. That might make you feel more comfortable. But I've decided that international education is a life hack. So I would encourage you to embrace that life hack with us and come and join this really, really neat community.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I learned a few things myself that I didn't know, even though we worked very closely. Yet over the COVID time where we were all in isolation in our own homes, we still worked very closely as a team. And, it was just such a joy to work with you and still, have you as a friend and, halfway around the world and reflect on that time in our office when you were there. It's truly special. And thank you so much for joining us today. If anybody had any questions, how could they get a hold of you?
Sure. Yeah. It's my email's super simple. It's just Stephen, Steven, Johanson, Johanson, at uwccostarica.org. So all you need is my first and last name, and then just the website for the school, uwccostarica.org. So anytime people have questions, like happy to talk to them about whatever, right? Switching sides of the desk, moving abroad, switching back sides of the desk, in the rarity that people do that. I do think that, you can make a lot of these same arguments the other direction, and the people who I've spoken to who have gone back into admissions from college counseling feel like they are better admissions counselors for having worked with students and families on this side. So, happy to talk about all of those things. Or about how my dog is the best dog in the world because she is. Any of those things happy to speak about.
Oh, well, we do love June, your dog. She is gorgeous, and I'm so glad that you are settling well into Costa Rica and things are going smoothly and you're closer to family. It's such a joy to catch up today and to talk with you and have this time together. And thank you so much for being a part of the WRC community. We really appreciate it and sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us today.
Well, I'm thrilled, and I love that I got invited to the WRC community because I think it's really neat that you're doing this and helping other people see our role for what it is and help them understand our world. It's really neat.
Thanks, Stephen, so much. I appreciate you. And thank you, everybody, today for joining us on today's episode. I'll leave all the details of how to get in touch with Stephen in the show notes. And make it your mission, as always, to be a blessing in other people's life. And make sure that you follow your dreams and your passions. And I cannot wait to catch you all on the next episode. Did you love the episode? I hope you're feeling inspired and no longer feeling alone out there and you're ready to evolve and become a better person. Make sure that you share this podcast or take a screenshot and post it on your social media. That's how you help spread this podcast organically and people can find it much easier when you share or share it with a loved one. I'm your host, Katrina Marie, and make it your mission to be a blessing in someone else's life today.